And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it, and that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. Tonight I'm joined by my guest, Jared. Jared, thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Stoked to be here, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Oh man, I guess I should. I own a company called Nomadica Films. I've been making TV shows and films I always think that everything's been like a couple of years, but really it's been like 20 some years. You know, I think everything's just a couple of years ago, but it's been a while. And the latest project we've been working on is a reboot of MonsterQuest, which has just been a blast to put together. So that just premiered, and this week will be episode 4. So yeah, that's monsters and creatures and unknown encounters has been my world for like in a very intense way for the past year and a half.
Of all things out there, everyone always asks why we always go towards monsters and cryptids and everything else. And what is your reasoning for? I have my reasons, but what drew you into that?
Years ago, I was brought on. When I first started out in the business, I was known to sort of go into sort of dangerous places. You know, I filmed in Afghanistan for a couple of years. I was just sort of the dangerous expedition guy. I was lucky enough to be known for that because it sent me to some really odd places and cool places in the world. And one of the adventures I got to go on is I got to go to the Himalayas in Nepal looking for the Yeti for an earlier version of MonsterQuest. And I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. Sasquatch was 100% part of my childhood. I didn't have really any encounters as a kid, but my friends' parents did, people I know that did. So I've always had a general curiosity about this stuff. And we were talking to History Channel about a couple different shows, and cryptids came up, and it was obviously a place that I thought I always think about how do I want to spend the next year or two of my life, and I've always wanted to sort of do something that took a kind of a deep dive look into the worlds of cryptids. So it started as like a really informal conversation, and then it just took me down a road. And I've known Adam Davies for a long time, and so that's sort of like a constant communication about the little adventures he's gone on. So I've always been curious about it, and so when the opportunity sort of came up to sort of do a little bit of deeper dive into it, I jumped at it because it's always something that I've been curious about, and it's definitely something that a lot of encounters here in my backyard, and so that was the real reasoning. Is I tend to believe that it's more interesting to think that there are things out there that we don't understand than to think that we know it all. And so it felt like a real unique opportunity to make that my life and my focus for a bit, and I'm glad I did. It's been a lot of fun.
I know the first episode came out a couple of weeks back, and I watched it because I've always been a fan of MonsterQuest, and I was excited to see the new season come out. But there's several people that I know personally that are involved in it, and the first episode was with Martin Groves, and we were talking off air, like he's a great guy. Awesome. And I was just excited to have the show back on because it's something that 20 years ago was one of the first outlets for me was to watch that show because I was like, oh, there's other people. So it was just one of those things because back then, like when that first came out, it was before Finding Bigfoot. It was before some of these other shows, whatever. And you didn't hear a whole lot. You had shows like maybe Sightings back in the 90s, I think it was, and you had like In Search of with Leonard Nimoy years and years ago. But there wasn't a show like MonsterQuest up until MonsterQuest. And I think that kind of paved the way for a lot of the stuff that people do. I think, to be 100% honest, it paved the way for me doing my podcast because it gave me that inspiration. So it's cool to see it back. So I'm glad that you're involved with it and bringing it back out there for everyone.
Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been really fun. And yeah, it was a part of my, like, you know, growing up and my that part of my life too. And but yeah, I'm pretty thrilled to be part of bringing it back. It's been a blast. And I like, you know, I think that, you know, a lot of these shows tend to live a little more on the sensational side of the story and to make it into something else or poke holes. And I always felt like, you know, the original MonsterQuest really went about it very objectively and thoughtfully. And it was kind of fun to carry that torch forward in terms of our approach for this season and just trying to, you know, not question it, not try to look for, or not try to even ask the question, is this true or is this not true? It really was not the point of the show. The point of the show is just to elevate credible stories where somebody had an encounter with something that they cannot understand and trying to look into history and trends and patterns to sort of elevate this idea that they are not one-off experiences and that these are part of like deeper histories and that these people have gone through. So yeah, anyway, I'm glad you're excited that it's back, and I'm pretty excited it's back too.
Without ruining it or spoiling it for anyone, what was your favorite story that you guys covered? Is that something you can talk about?
That's such a tough question. I mean, you brought up Martin earlier. It's impossible not to at least ponder Martin as my favorite story. Mm-hmm. You know, Martin is fascinating, and there's so many layers to it, so many sort of mysteries and peculiarities to it, and obviously the area land between the lakes is a fascinating place with a really wild history. So that story was really fascinating. You know, there's this story coming up in this Friday's episode with Shane Luthold, who's a judge right now in Ohio, and he had an encounter when he was a kid in some cornfields out there that is just a really cool story. You know, it's a really interesting story, and obviously his background and sort of his place in as a judge is interesting. He's super credible. So Shane's was really fascinating too. There's a guy also named John Mianchinsky. He's a wildlife biologist out of Wyoming who had an encounter, and his story was fascinating as well. And I remember leaving that interview with him, and it was right before Jeff Meldrum passed tragically. And I had reached out to Jeff right after I met John because I thought, oh man, we're going to do a feature documentary with these guys. Like, there's just so much to the story, and they had some unique evidence. And I think I'm really drawn, you know, to stories where, you know, I think some people have a lot to lose by coming out and telling these stories, you know, and somebody who's like a wildlife biologist who exists in science and its credibility is everything, to come out and say, oh, I've had an encounter with Sasquatch, and this is the evidence I've had. It's a larger barrier for someone to overcome, to come out and do that within sort of that scientific community with a creature that science hasn't recognized yet. And so I don't know, John's story is fascinating. It has some really cool evidence to it. And, you know, there are certain people I've talked to that I feel like are right on that precipice of delivering something to the scientific community that I think will just change the narrative to 180 degrees, you know, and just the general consensus in the public. So I don't know, those three, it's hard for me to choose though, because to be honest, it's a really tough question, because I found, and I really don't mean this, every story that we covered, I found to be so credible and so interesting. And I really left those interviews with a completely different perspective on whether it was like an alien abduction or a dog man or a Bigfooter or goat man. There's a lot of things out there that I feel like we don't quite understand. So they're all really incredible stories.
There's all sorts of different types of cryptids that you just kind of wonder, like, what are people seeing? Because, like, you just mentioned goat man. the lore with Goatman is usually it's around a bridge, and it's usually like a railroad bridge, at least the ones that I've been around here, because I was at Goatman Festival back in, I think it was September or October, and this was down in Louisville, it stems for around like this old legend around a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's one in Texas too, it's the same story, where it's a Goatman and it's around an old railroad bridge. Where does this, like, where do they come from? Like, when it comes to like Goatman, this is what I like to find out. Like, where did those stories originate from? Like, how did the legends happen where people are seeing these things all around railroad tracks? Like when we talked off air about Dogman around river systems, like a lot of people see them around the rivers. So it gives some sort of credence to the idea that, well, if someone sees a Goatman around train tracks all the time, around a bridge for trains, and then people see Dogman around river systems, like, you have to think that there's some sort of credibility to what the people are seeing because it sounds so similar to what other people have talked about that they might not even know someone talked about it before.
Yeah, that consistency is undeniable, and it's not like they're all getting together and being like, hey, let's
right.
Let's make this the singular connective tissue between our stories. Yeah, Shadow Man too. Like the Shadow Man stuff is something I sort of knew about it, but I didn't have any sort of deep knowledge of it. And that was something that really surprised me with this series. That one spooked me out a little bit. But I think sometimes people see something, they might not say in the moment, "Oh, that was a Goatman," but then they do exactly what you do: is they research, they look, they try to find similarities to what they saw, and they come to the conclusion it must have been that. Gil Sanchez is a police officer in the first episode that believed he ran right over this Goatman. He thought it wrecked his entire cruiser. Can't find any evidence of anything, any sort of collision or anything, but he sees this thing. And he connected it to these old mines in New Mexico, is where he felt like that history was. But yeah, there are these sort of very strange connections and similarities from one encounter to the next, that kind of make it feel undeniable that something peculiar is roaming around that area.
We were on our way to a different event, and I was at one of those Buc-ee's. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what a Buc-ee's is, but someone came up to me because I was wearing a shirt that had like a Bigfoot on it, and he just started talking to me because I'm wearing a Bigfoot shirt of all things. It brought this guy up, and I told him I was like, well, I do a podcast. I'm actually on my way to a Bigfoot convention. And then he just dead straight looked me in the eye and said, so you're into this type of stuff? I said, yeah. He's like, what is something that kind of looks like a deer, has like deer looking legs, but it almost had like the body of a pig? I was like, what? I was like, I don't know. And then he proceeded to tell me that when a couple of years ago he was driving a truck at night, and he said he swore like a big hog come running out across the road, but it was on deer legs.
Wow.
I was like, I've never heard of that before, so I can't tell you anything. I was like, it was just random guy saw me wearing a Bigfoot shirt, so he came over. I was like, he could have been making the whole thing up, maybe. I was like, but the chances are, like, why would you just randomly make that up for no reason?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think it's one of the more unique things about like just where we are in this specific time with these stories is that there's just a lot of people wearing Bigfoot shirts around. There's a lot more acceptance about these types of stories and encounters than there ever has been before. And some of the stuff that was really fun of this series was to go, where part of the casting was obviously just going and talking to people and chatting with someone like you and say, oh, you should talk to this person. A lot of it's word of mouth is really how the whole process happened. But some about it was just trying to find really famous stories, and then trying to see if there was somebody who could take us right to that. And the Mothman was a story, like Christina Bennett, the Bennett family, which the Mothman feature film Richard Gere is built on, based on their family experience. And man, that was awesome getting to sit down with her and talking about, she was only 4 years old when it happened, but that first person perspective on these very famous stories, which I have some familiarity with, but then hearing somebody specifically, that was uniquely tied to it was really fascinating. Or like Geraldine Stith with like the Kelly, the Hopkinsville Green Men, and she's amazing storyteller, truly amazing storyteller. But that story is crazy. It's just a really, really wild story that not only have stuck with sort of those people, but have stuck with that family for generations. In terms of like how that sort of continues. So I don't know. It's been a very eye-opening experience doing that show. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So I had Geraldine on the show back in 2024, but I was actually at GoblinCon with her this past year. She asked me if I wanted to be down there for that. So the first GoblinCon. Oh, cool.
She's great.
Yeah. I love Geraldine. She's a great gal. But when you were talking, that was the first thing I thought. I was like, I wonder if you've actually talked to Geraldine, because I was like, the Hopkinsville story, the Kelly Green Men, is one of those stories that I think would have been great to have included in there. So
yeah, it's in there. It's
awesome.
in there. Yeah. But yeah, it was sort of, we heard about the story and then we're like, okay, let's see who's, if there's anyone that can tell us about it. And so when we found Geraldine, yeah, she was an awesome storyteller. I mean, I could have listened to her talk about that stuff forever. She's a hoot. Real sweet lady.
Yeah, her and a couple of other people that I've met from, like, you've mentioned the judge, and most of us refer to him as the judge. It's Shane, but like
the judge, the judge.
To be 100% honest, he is the first podcast story that I had ever heard, because I didn't know anything about podcasting, and I come across a show, and the first episode that I hit play on was his interview on a different podcast, and I never heard anyone else talk about a dog man before. And this guy is a judge, and this was back in like 2020. So this is like when I first started researching how to do a podcast, because I didn't know anything about podcasting. And I thought I had a great idea. I'm going to talk about cryptids and aliens and all sorts of stuff that no one's doing. And little did I know that
there's a couple.
Yeah. So I thought I had a great idea, and come to find out that it wasn't really all that original, but I still do it anyways. But no, I've never actually spoken with him. I've always wanted to, but like his story's always stuck with me because it's like the first one I actually heard on a podcast. So anytime someone mentions the judge, I was like, yeah, that's kind of why I'm sitting here.
Yeah, that was the beginning.
Yeah.
That was the beginning for, yeah, Shane's great. Yeah, his story, yeah, the way he tells it, it's just so visual. It's just so visual, and you can just imagine it so clearly. And the way we approach these stories, obviously we'd film the sit-down interview, and then we'd sort of storyboard out these recreations. And then we obviously do use, AI technology to sort of just visualize the creatures. But filming his recreation was really fun. I mean, we dorked out with that one. Just like getting into a cornfield, and we hired this actor. He did just an awesome job. And, but yeah, you kind of like, you want, the idea is that you're trying to get the audience to sort of just like relive it. But it's the way he tells his story is really fascinating and very captivating, and very, so I can see why that stuck out to you. It was like, and really has stuck with you through the years for sure.
Yeah, I said I wasn't familiar with podcasts. I heard of Joe Rogan. I watched some of his stuff on like YouTube, especially when he interviewed I can't even think of his, Bob Lazar, the guy that used to be out at like Area 51. He said, I've watched his interview, but that's what I thought of podcast. And then I was in my vehicle. I got tired of listening to music. I was like, I'm going to look up podcast stuff. That's what I had the idea for starting one. And the first podcast I came across was called Sasquatch Chronicles. And the first episode was with Shane. I was like, so I got hooked instantly. After I heard his interview, I started binging through these episodes. And then I was like, yep, I got to do this now.
Yeah, it's tough, because they, people like Shane, Martin, they set a high bar. They really do, for not just like the details and memories that they have of their stories, but also just sort of like how they present. And I actually thought finding the stories and finding really captivating storytellers, first person witnesses, was going to be tough, and it was not. there's I'll probably say this too much, but it's not like these type of encounters have a type. There's no type, it's people that like the judge. It wasn't on his radar. He was just a kid when that happened, running around praying. I think he's training for like the Bratwurst 500 or something like that, if I remember correctly. I've listened to these stories a few times in the editing phase, and these things just happen to people unsuspected. There's no rhyme or reason. Martin's story, he was out there. He didn't think about this. It wasn't even something that was crossing his mind. He was just thinking turkey and dinner is all he was thinking at a break. So yeah, they set a high bar for the type of stories that we were going after, but they're awesome.
I think the most credible stories you hear are the people that aren't looking for it. It's the random instances of they happen to see something, they happen to run into something. Like when people tell me that they've been out hunting these things and all this, and they have all these encounters all the time, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say you're full of crap, but at the same time, it's like there are so many people that go out there and do that and never see anything. How come you can have all these encounters all the time, but all these other people don't see anything? And then it's the people that were not even wanting to see something that get freaked out by it and don't even want to talk about it. I was like, that seems to be the ones that stick out the most to me, because it resonates with me, because I understand it at the same time. Like, you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to deal with it. You're just like, nope, don't know what that was. Don't want to deal with it. So,
yeah. It's in this sort of, it's interesting. The show I did before MonsterQuest was on this really wild treasure hunt. I did this little limited series for Netflix, and they talked about one of the themes that kept coming up in that show was cognitive bias. And you have basically created an idea in your head, and then the evidence sort of feeds into that idea, right? Like it's not. And I think that's why, for me, similar to you, Brandon, like people's first encounter is the most fascinating to me, because they're not looking for anything. There's no cognitive bias. There's nothing there that they're sort of setting this. Oh, I have this idea of, I'm going in the woods looking for such and such, and I hear something, and I immediately connect it. Well, is it this or is it not? When you're going in the woods just to camp or not do anything, you're not thinking about that. When you hear a noise, it's just like, well, that's an odd noise. You have nothing to organize it in your head, other than after the fact going and trying to figure out, okay, what was that attached to? It reminds me of like last week's episode with Daniel Hamilton. He was a young kid going out, just to this hunting camp with his family, and he heard something. And in that moment, he thought it was a bear. But afterwards, he heard Ron Moorhead's Sierra Sounds, and he's like, oh no, that's what I heard. And I find that fascinating when people sort of hear something after the fact. They go looking for answers, and they go, whoa, that's the same sound I heard. But it's so that the people's first encounters, I always feel like, are the purest. Mm-hmm. The first time they see something. Doesn't mean that when they see something afterwards, they didn't see the thing. Doesn't mean that they didn't see it. But that first time where it was like, that was odd, that was unexpected, I can't explain it. And then you go searching for those answers. But yeah, cognitive bias, man, it's a pretty interesting theory.
Yeah, I tend to agree with it, because even if I ever see something again, I feel like I've lost the credibility of anything that I've ever said, because it's so random to see something in the first place. And when people are always seeing these things, that's when I start to pump the brakes a little bit. I'll be like, if you see these things all the time, how come there's no evidence that you're seeing it? And I've talked to people that claim that they know that they can't take photos of them. I was like, how does that work? So it's like, it gets into like a little murky area that I don't try and like argue with people or prove or disprove anything. But it's like, I feel like at this stage of technology where we're at in society and with the shows and everything else, it's gotten to the point to where it's going to take some really definitive proof to bring a lot of people over into the believing side that are on the fence about it, just because the stories are great, but there are some, I can tell myself, I've seen stuff, but I'm still that way too. Like, I have to see some sort of proof to understand like what's going on out there. And I think that's just how it is for a lot of people.
I agree. And I think that AI is only going to make it more complicated.
It has.
At this stage, I mean, it's a really great tool for some stuff, but man, it's going to make the credibility and authenticity of an image or a photo it'll be so much harder now, so much more difficult. It's kind of a shame, but I think it's just a reality. Yeah, that the evidence now will have a higher hill to climb than it used to, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of people don't like to say this or whatever, but I think it's going to take a body. Like, there's a lot of people that are against like taking the life of something, like if there's a Bigfoot or anything like that, and people can get mad at me, but I said, if a dog man ever runs out in front of me, I'm going to run it over because
that's what it's going to take. But
yeah.
You're right. That's what science needs. Science needs a body. I remember when I was doing the project in Nepal, and we brought along this guy, awesome guy. Adam was one of them. He was great. But we also brought this guy named Ian Redmond, and he was the number 2 to Diane Fossey, the great ape researcher back in the day who was murdered. And when she was murdered, he sort of stepped into her shoes, so to say, and we were up there, and I remember asking him, we were in Nepal, and we're just, I was probably sitting around drinking maybe a little whiskey or something one night. And I was like, hey man, what do you think, Ian? Do you think that like something like this could really exist up here? And he said, well, people didn't believe the great apes of Virunga were real forever until 2 British guys saw one, killed him, and brought back the body. I mean, that is how science moves to recognize these things. Is so you have to have the body, you have to have evidence. So I totally agree. I think that will be the piece of evidence that really changes the narrative around some of these creatures.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Adam. I met Adam a couple of years ago at one of those Bigfoot gatherings, and he's a great guy. Our booths were set up right next to each other, so we shot the crap all weekend with each other.
He's a funny guy, man. That guy cracks me up. He's he's almost, sometimes I feel like the most unlikely character to go on these big expeditions, because he is clumsy as you can imagine. It's incredible you've survived some of the places you've been in, but he's awesome. I love Adam. He's such a hoot. Yeah, good guy to have around.
Yeah, he messaged me the other day and said he had someone I needed to talk to, and that's how we got in contact. So shout out to Adam Davies for hooking us up.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a great connector.
Yeah. So when it comes to MonsterQuest and everything, and you deal with like the History Channel, how many episodes are there going to be for this season?
Yeah, there'll be 8 episodes.
We
did 8 1-hour episodes. So 5 stories per episode. So 40 stories altogether. Okay.
And that was something that they were wanting, was like a minimum 5 per episode, or is that just kind of what you guys ended up filming?
No, that was kind of their sweet spot. Yeah, that was their sweet spot as far as what the number they wanted per episode. And they do a lot of these sort of, I think it's kind of comes down to people's attention span these days. I think people are very used to things moving quickly. Yep. I tend to and over the years I like slower stories that have more detail. But I think there's a right format for everything. I think this format works really well. I think early on I was a little more concerned about our ability to fit 5 stories in. And maybe it's because I sat down and talked to each one of these folks for like 1 to 2 hours each. So it's like, oh man, how do I cut that into a 10 minute or so story? It's sort of hard to. But the way it shook out, it really worked. I think it worked really, really well. 5 stories per episode, but each one, I always say this, most stories certainly has a lot more detail, and that's why I'm glad there's so many different platforms for each one of these stories. They're all meant for different audiences. The podcasting platform is great. It's like you guys can get into such detail with these stories that we're not necessarily able to, sometimes I'm on a cable show like that. So it's these stories have multiple platforms and multiple reasons, and these stories there's a reason they're retold multiple times, because they're deserving for sure. But yeah, five per episode is something that they were hoping we could hit. And when we got in there and started the editing process, it worked pretty well.
That's the one thing with my show that I've struggled with when doing my own filming for my documentary is I don't edit anything out that like people talk about in their encounters. I know some shows like cut clips here and they make it all. I leave everything exactly how the person tells it, because I feel like if I start to doctor up what they're doing, I feel like I'm pushing it towards a specific way, and I want it to be authentic to how the person told their encounter. So I don't try and edit anything like that, but with my documentary, I don't have time to keep someone's attention, so I've had to go in and edit some stuff out that wasn't really as needed to be in there, and that's where I've struggled with, is like, how do I go into someone's stuff and edit it down, because it goes against like my golden rule of what I do with my podcast to try and make everything fit, because you can't have someone talking for 20 straight minutes and then try and keep it all into a very small section of a video. So that's I don't envy you for having to sit through all these interviews and do that.
No doubt, the hardest decisions. Those are the hardest decisions to make. What goes in and what goes out, and I just think my job is to make sure like whoever's watching it is pulled along and they want to listen to what's next, and I feel like people are watching television or watching content, not podcasts, but that with their finger on the button.
Mm-hmm.
They're just trying not to want them to change the channel.
Yeah.
But those decisions are the absolute worst. They're the worst and the hardest. It's like the content that ends on the cutting room floor is sometimes real painful. Really, really painful.
So you went on this expedition in search for the Yeti. What about that still stands out? Like, what did you guys come across when you were out there that you think could have been evidence? I know this has been years ago, but.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't, to be honest, like we didn't find, we went out there, we brought along this another amazing guy named Yagi Hara. Yagi was was an incredible mountain climber. I'd summited Everest multiple times, and he was out climbing in this area. And the reason we targeted the area we did is because he had found a print, a track that he thought could belong to the Yeti. So that sort of was one of the areas made us focus on this specific area in the Himalayas of Nepal. But this is before the time of drones, so when we had like an aerial platform created with a helium balloon with a flare camera at the bottom of it that we raised up at this crazy altitude that remoted down, and Adam had like a little monitor that so we could sort of look at this area at night and see if there were any heat signatures roaming around this area. We brought a lot of cool tech and a lot of cool people out there. I mean, Ian, when we went down, so Adam and I went up with Yagi to this high altitude area, and then we split. And so Ian went down to this river area, which he felt like was likely more of a likely habitat for a creature matching the Yeti's abominable snowman or Yeti's description. And they found some funny things. They found some skeletons and stuff, and but not. We really didn't find any evidence that furthered it. But I think that's kind of the state of any expedition. Is sort of you go out there and you try to follow the evidence that sort of has come before you to see what else you can find. And I think we did that really successfully. But I think what I left there with was like a clear understanding of I remember Ian said to me, and Adam too, he's like, here we are in, a very remote area. If we haven't seen this Yeti, the likelihood that it's seen us is high. They've lived there and been able to disguise themselves for years. They know the area very well. The likelihood we're going to find something like that and see it with a creature that knows this area way more than we do and have been here for generations is so freaking low. But still, it planted a very, very large seed of curiosity, I will say, in myself. To just understand, that there are certainly humans have seen a lot of our planet. We've seen a lot of places, but there are still a lot of places that are very remote and untouched where creatures like this can live. And there's places, like around the river systems like we were talking about earlier, where they can't hide as much. And there are a larger concentration of sightings. So anyway, just that trip really just gave me a new perspective, in terms of the conditions by which a creature like a Sasquatch or a Yeti could exist for so long. And still we don't have like that proof, but that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. And personally, that got me pretty excited. I like the fact that there are things out there that humans haven't discovered. And I think that makes the world a way more interesting place to live.
It'd be very boring if there wasn't some sort of mysteries out there still to solve.
Heck yeah, man. Heck yeah. I couldn't agree more.
I think about when you just mentioned, just think about just Canada, for example, all the northern parts of Canada, they're not as populated like Alaska. There's so many just untapped areas just around here, around the United States, that are vast that we don't even think about. Then you have the jungles of Africa and Brazil, and it's naive to think that we know everything.
Oh my God. I did a series years ago up in the called The Last Alaskans. We were up in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge of Alaska. That's a refuge. It's literally the size of South Carolina, and 6 families have permits to live there. There are no roads. There's nothing. And this remote wild wilderness exists, like you said, exists in our worlds. And I just love getting the opportunity to exist in those places is pretty thrilling, where it just feels like there's really no imprint of humanity, and really difficult ways to access it as well. So yeah, that was a pretty special part of the world. But I did think about this is after Nepal, and I certainly thought about what else exists up here outside of grizzlies for sure when I was in that part of Alaska.
I guess while I'm thinking about this, I'll go ahead and ask, of all, like, how did you get involved with making like the series and stuff with TV and everything, like the stuff that you've been doing? Like, how did you come about being involved in doing all this? Is this something that you wanted to do as like a kid and went to school for it, or just kind of fell into it?
No, not really. This is the real story. It kind of fell into it. So I was going to college. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I knew I liked creative stuff though. I liked creating, and I really wanted to travel. And I lived down in Belize for a little bit, and I was teaching down there. I sort of dropped out of college and just went and did that stuff for a little bit. And I came back and wanted to finish my degree, but didn't know what to do. So I applied to a bunch of art colleges. I was like, Rhode Island School of Design was one, and the other one was Emerson College in Boston. And this is the long answer to your question. So just stick with it. You could. And I went there and they said, what do you want to declare? I didn't declare a major. And I said, well, I told my cousin, what's the quickest way I can graduate? And she said, film and TV production or studies or something like that. And I was like, that sounds cool. And so I studied, and it was a really good fit. I think I only had like another year left of my 4-year degree. And so I did that. And then I moved out to LA, and I first started working. I thought I wanted to do scripted stuff. So I was working at Warner Brothers, just reading scripts. And I just hated that culture, man. I hated it. It was like everyone's in a suit every day. Everyone's just networking. No one's hanging out with their friends. And so I called a friend of mine. He was working in TV. I just said, hey, get me in shorts and a t-shirt. I don't care what I'll do. I just want to go do something fun. And I'm the first show I did was like this like kind of, I was a PA, on this cleaning reality show. It was pretty nasty. And then when I went to, they did a show in the Cayman Islands. And then my next show, I was in the Arctic of Canada working on ice road truckers, as like a camera op producer. And it just, it fit me, but I dove into it pretty big. I mean, I like lived out of my car for years, and I just lived on the road. I was just this isn't a technical term, but I was like a TV bum. I went where the adventure was, and I loved putting myself in places and situations that didn't exist, and I was just curious. I think I had success because I just liked talking to people about stuff, and sitting in a truck with someone driving up an ice road for 24 hours straight, staying up. Like, I liked putting myself through kind of like that suffering. And I liked just having, I would always say, like, sort of non-disposable conversations, like deep conversation with people, fun, but also just asking tough conversations. I'm sure you know this in your job too. Some of the coolest things that I love is I can ask people questions that their best friends wouldn't ask them, because I'm in their life and then I'm out of their life, and I still care about them, and I still keep in touch with a lot of those folks. But my job sort of demands that I ask hard questions in a very respectful way. And I love that. I just loved having very real, deep conversations. So yeah, I kind of got into it at the right time, when a lot of this travel, unscripted, I never really got into like the reality. I didn't like that type of, backbiting, high drama stuff. I like man versus Mother Nature. I liked going to difficult places and, kind of, I don't mean this literally, but it is sort of literally, but riding shotgun with people who are living really extreme lives, that's working with, chimps or elephants in remote parts of Africa, or, living a unique lifestyle in Alaska. So I just kind of jumped into it. And to be honest, like I think with anything, I found my community. You know, I met all my good friends in that industry, and you tend to sort of find your people, and then you kind of jump from adventure to adventure to adventure together. And I was also pretty careful about the stuff that I did. You know, I really wanted to do shows that I felt like there was a real story there, that we weren't going to have to make up a bunch of stuff or fake a bunch of drama. Like I really just felt like the real story is enough. And so I picked my projects pretty carefully, and that served me really, really well. But really just finding out the right people, and I just dove right into it. Sorry, that was a real long-winded answer to your question.
No, you're good. I've always been curious. Like as a kid, one of the things I wanted to do when I grew up was always I wanted to make movies. So I used to get out our video camera and I'd video things, and I'd make little stop motion stuff with my G.I. Joes or some stuff like that. But as I got older, I got into the music, and then now I have a full-time job. I'm in charge of construction projects, highway projects, but at night I moonlight as a podcaster. So. But it's just one of those things, like I've always found it fascinating when it comes to like making art, making like, again, music, making shows. To me, it's like you're creating something. Like you said, it's like a creative outlet. I think that's why I come to the podcast, because I can actually do this and I don't have to necessarily rely on a lot of other people. It's just my own thing where I can come out here and talk to people.
Yeah. It's awesome. I as a kid, I lived like I was always into creating. I liked sort of like the chaos of it. I love the chaos of my job, to be honest. And I call it chaos is because, you know, I'm especially when I was freelance, or even now, even owning like Nomadica in the company, I would say, what's going to fall from the sky tomorrow? You know, what random opportunity is just going to fall from the sky that's going to send me all halfway across the world? It's like there's no predictability. And some people really struggle with that, right? Like I think a lot, especially having kids, I need a little bit more predictability that I had when I was younger. But there's still that piece of unpredictability that I really, really like, that I can't, you know, I think for myself, I like living in that chaos. I love living in the unpredictability. I love being like, I'm going to tell stories this year, but I don't know where it's going to take me. I don't know what situation is going to put me in front of. And then you got to get there and you got to educate yourself as quickly as possible, you know, and it's such a cool way to continue my education and learn about things that I literally could not have guessed. I could never have anticipated anything that of these adventures or stories that I get to go tell. And I like that about it a lot, the randomness and the chaos of it. And yeah, it's fun. It's fun to create. You know, for me, I think the hard part is just, you know, when people, I'm sure the same with you, like when people tell me their story and put their trust in me that I'm gonna, you know, I'm putting it on a big platform. I just want to do the justice, you know, and that really is like what drives me. It's if my mother was on this podcast with me, she said, it's your guilt, Jared. Your guilt is what drives you. But I think it is. It's like I really do have this sort of like sense of the kind way to put it is responsibility. But I like it, the fear side of me. Like I just want to take and tell these stories as best as I can, whether that's like a soundbite or a visual or whatever that is. It's just try to like do that person's story justice. And when every one of these episodes air, like every time Friday night comes, I'm just sitting there waiting for the emails to come, like, oh man, I hope they liked it. Yeah, I really, truly, that is like my level of anxiety. But yeah, I've always loved creative stuff. I love music. Growing up too, just like you, it was never in a band or anything like that. But I always wanted to pursue something that felt creative. I think the challenge is always like, how do you make that a business? You know, the business of creativity, I think, is really tricky. You know, it's just like it's once you add that aspect into it, it inevitably changes it. You know, it changes having to figure out how you monetize that creativity. I remember I worked as I used to do like blown glass back in the day. I mean, growing up in the Northwest, that's like a big thing out here, is like, you know, is making those things. So I remember I did a class with this guy, and part of the class was like, you know, you had to make I made like a really tall, long vase. And he's like, I like that. Now the trick is, how do I make 100 of those? And I was like, that doesn't sound fun, man. I want to put this one aside and make a new one. but that is like the business of creativity, which is sort of like that repetition. And I think I think for anyone who has creative endeavors, that's a really tricky thing to figure out, is the business behind creating and change.
Mm-hmm. And it's the other thing is to keep, maybe for me, but like, it's to keep the interest of my own self, but also the people that are involved with it, that want to come on the show, the people that want to listen to this stuff. Like I have to find the things interesting to keep my own fascination going. And with you traveling around doing, like, it has to be something you would have to be interested in. You wouldn't go and do something that you've already said, like, you're not going to go to like do reality TV of the drama and stuff like that. It's something that you enjoy. You have to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, totally. I think I can probably convince myself to be pretty excited or curious about most things. I can find some sort of justification for it, but you're right. Like, but I think that it's kind of a mindset of just realizing that, like, there's something interesting, I think, in everything for me. But sometimes you got to find it. Like the surface levels, like, that's not interesting to me. But there's always something there. And I think that's the part of storytelling I really like, is sometimes what's like on the surface is what most people would tell. I'm going to tell the surface level story. That's the obvious story. But I think what I find interesting in terms of what I do is like, and this is why, like, most of my interviews I do are like hours and hours and hours and hours long. Because if you wear people down, you find the part of their story or the part of an adventure that I think is interesting. And so that's what I kind of always like. It's almost like the search for that little nugget is what is curious to me. That's what I kind of get excited about. But you're right. If I can't just, I wouldn't be, if I'm just doing something for like a paycheck or something. Sometimes I wish I was that guy, because it'd be a little bit easier to operate that way. But I always feel like there has to be something else there that speaks to me. And that, to your point, that's when I feel like I actually do a good job, when I have like that I'm invested in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So
I feel like when I do my show, for me, it's the people are trusting me enough to come on here and talk about things that you can't usually talk about with people. So I feel like it's my responsibility to not alter what they're saying, not do a whole, like, I present it as this is their word. Now, and I've said this on other episodes, so anyone listens, I'm not saying that everything that someone comes on here and tells me is 100% factual, but I think they believe what they're telling me.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean that I don't believe them, but it also means, like we talked about earlier, it could be a mistaken identity. You may not have seen what you think you saw. You may not have experienced what you did, but you saw something.
Yeah.
So I wasn't there. I didn't see it. So who am I to say that you didn't see what you said you saw?
Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's way more interesting to buy in than it is to not. It's like if I did go to an interview, be like, I don't know if I believe this one. Like, I'm not going to do a good job either. Like for me, like I go in with, I'm hooked, and it's not false. Like I'm not faking it at all. Like I really go in, just like, I think like you're saying, to these conversations. I'm super curious. I really want to hear what people say. And I'm not having the conversation in my head going, do I believe this or not? That question is not in my head. It is not the point of it. It's not what I'm after. It's not why I'm having the conversation. And I think that puts people at ease. I think you can read that on people's faces, and I'm always I always truly am like leaning in. Like I get out of that and I feel exhausted after an interview. I'm sure people who talk to me feel exhausted too, because I'm hooked. Like I'm just really, I'm obsessed with their story. I remember I went to Nepal. Like, and Adam likes to give me a hard time about this, but like I went to Nepal. I remember I turned to my crew. I was convinced we were going to capture a visual of the Yeti. Like that's how I wanted to go into that experience. Convinced that what we had put together was going to come back with some evidence. I remember I looked at my crew and I was like, everyone's in charge of getting the shot. Just because you're not Adam or Ian or Yagi Hara and you're not on camera, your job is to keep an eye out as well. Your job is to look around and see what we see, because we're in a really unique area. This is a really unique opportunity, and I think we've set this up really well. And I was bought in. That's what made it exciting for me.
Mm-hmm.
And believe that this was really going to like net something. So yeah, I'm that's kind of like my philosophy with all this stuff is I always am bought in. I'm always bought in. I choose not to live with this. Maybe later I'll think skeptically about it and sort of ponder it a little bit and think about it. But in the moment, I'm just there to sort of like receive it and just experience it. And I think it's more fun for me.
From all your travels and everything that you have done, has there been anything you've ever experienced that you can't explain? As far as like could be paranormal, or you mentioned you have like seen anything that just makes you question anything?
I mean, Adam took me. There's definitely been stuff on some of my travels that's been odd. The one story I had with Adam though is he was coming up to. It was after we got back from Nepal, and he was coming back to the Pacific Northwest, and he was going to head up to this area in the Cascades. This guy named Donald Lee Wallace used to he's a big Bigfoot researcher back in the day. I think he lived up there for like 28 years, and Adam was with his daughter, and this guy must have recorded. I mean, just had piles of tapes, just old cassette tapes. And I just pictured him like having those old cassette recorders, and he would just record the sounds of the Cascades. Just thinking, what is he recording? Is he recording the sounds of Sasquatch? And so we went back up there, and he took me up there, and we went to this tree, and we got to that tree, and Lori, who was Donald had passed at this point, but Donald's daughter went to this tree, and she's talking, hey big guy, and put apples down and some chocolate, and we heard nothing. And I brought a buddy along, and I was like, oh man, I'm not going to hear the end of this. My buddy's going to give me a hard time about this for the rest of my days. And we walk around a little bit, and we come back, and Lori's like, Jared, why don't you come over, just you and I come over to this tree. And we go to this tree, and it's kind of just right early spring. There's still a little bit of snow on the ground. It's like kind of a camping area. But there's nobody else there. And we go to this area, and she's like, hey, big guy. And I heard a growl coming from beneath this tree, and then like a knocking from underneath this tree. And Brandon, it went on for hours, like a long time. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, it's a bear, it's this, I'm just in my head, I'm kind of questioning because it's just so bizarre. And the area had it was like a thick moss floor. It was like a mossy floor basically. And I walked around that area for a long time looking for some entryway in, but I couldn't figure it out. And I had a little recorder with me, and you can, if you have the right headphones on, you can hear the growl. And I think about it a lot. Like I think about that a lot, and I just could not explain it. And since it was the same place, Lori had come back for years and years and years and years, and she said, "Oh yeah, this is the tree that this Sasquatch like lives underneath this tree." And I heard it. I can't explain it. And even my buddy that went out there, inevitably, he's a dentist. I'm going to see him tomorrow, and I guarantee you, tomorrow morning, this is what he brings up with me. I guarantee it. It is like. It is like the constant source of communication, constant source of conversation between us is going back to this event with Adam and the Cascades, and I can't explain it. I find that the other things that I've seen, I have a terrible memory. So sometimes I will think I like have a memory, and I can't. I don't know if other people go through this, but I can't sometimes be like, well, am I just imagining that this happened, or did this really happen? That one mostly because there's other people there. That was an event I cannot explain.
No,
yeah, but it was cool. I'm really glad it happened. It was awesome.
Those things stick with you. The things that you can't explain, especially like you said, when you had other people there that witnessed it too. Like it reassures you that you did hear something.
Hear something.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I was on a podcast with Adam the other day, and someone had a similar question. They said, well, what about the moment up in the Cascades? I was like, of course that moment. Yes, that is a weird, odd moment. But yeah, it's hearing these stories makes you pay attention. Mm-hmm. It really, really does. I live on like 5 acres out here in the Northwest, and whenever I'm walking around my property at night with my dog, taking her out or something, or going to check on the chickens, closing the chicken coop, man, I will tell you these stories, especially for the first couple of months after I did all my interviews. I could not think about that. I could not walk out of my house into the dark and not ponder, is Dogman out here? Is Sasquatch out here? Is something from the sky about to come down and like, shine? I had to almost say like, Jared, chill out. Like this is fine. You've never seen anything on the property here. But it's, I kind of like accepted the fact that I knew that was going to happen to me. I knew that these stories, not just because I hadn't experienced what they have, but they've really stuck to me.
Yeah.
And they have like literally changed the way that I operate when I'm in the dark and what I'm looking for and what I'm listening to. And it kind of goes back to cognitive bias. Even not consciously, unconsciously, I am like looking and seeking and listening for the unexpected. And I just changed the way I operate.
Yep. Funny story. When we first moved out, you mentioned chickens. We had chickens. We don't anymore because mysteriously something kept getting in there and eating them, and it wasn't a Bigfoot or a dog man. It was a raccoon and a possum. But
oh yeah, they're a great nemesis, aren't they? That's raccoons.
But when we first moved in, we have goats too. And one of the first nights I went out there, and it's pitch black, and I wanted to go out there and make sure the goats went to their barn. And I don't know anything about goats. So it's pitch black. I'm already looking around because there's corn standing up and everything else because, again, I've had my own experience to where I know what's out there, or at least I think I might know what's out there. And I come around to where the goat barn is, and the moon is shining, and there's just a silhouette, and it's the whole Baphomet shape. It's the goats with the antlers, like the horns and everything, and it's standing up against a tree eating the bark. But the way I see it, it's on its back legs, and it's standing up like a person. And I instantly was like, the fear hits you because you're just like, uh-oh. And then I realized it's just the goat eating the bark, but like that, you're just not expecting to go out there and see it on its hind legs and then the silhouette of the horn sticking up and everything else. I was like, what kind of a house did we just buy? Because apparently the devil's in the backyard.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's fascinating. So I kind of wanted to ask you, like, the encounter that you had, did it make you want to stay in that area more?
So I grew up here. This is where I live now, is probably just 3 miles from where I grew up. And majority, like my parents still live down there. My grandparents live down there. And I got a bunch of aunt and uncles. They all lived in this area. And this thing happened to me about 2 miles up the road from where we live. And now I live just a couple miles from there. So I actually drive down that road all the time. And my older kids will ask me, what am I going to do if I ever see it again? I was like, I'm going to trump the gas. So it's, for the longest time, like I said, I've tried to write it off as it was just something explainable. But if you have time, I'll tell you off air the whole thing because there's a lot to it that makes no sense. And I don't want to bore the audience with it, but there's just so much to it that makes absolutely no sense that I struggle to accept my own, but I struggle to accept what I saw because there's absolutely no reason why this should exist. So it's just one of those things, and it haunts you. Because I can't explain it. I'm someone that's like very science-based. So I was like, there's no biological explanation of how a canine can walk like a human. Like there's no evolutionary line for that, at least not that I'm aware of. Like I could understand Bigfoot as a primate, but how do you explain that about a canine? So that's where I just struggle with it because there's no way it should have existed. So
I've heard that before, Brandon. You're not alone. I think that people, that's what makes it stick with you, right? Because it's sort of, you call it like a paradigm shift or whatever you want to call it. It changes. We all sort of, our brains, we have this, especially human beings, we have our brains live in a certain terms of order and construct, and that's how we survive in the world, right? You have a certain amount of knowns. Any animal, right? It creates your patterns of activity, your expectations, where safe and not safe. And when something like that happens, the reason I think it sticks with us so much is because it challenges that system by which how you've been operating your entire life.
Yeah.
And it's probably the source of your kids' question too. Hey, if you see this again, what are you going to do? Because it's it's something completely new. But I think that's what makes life interesting.
Yeah.
I think sometimes some people obviously have some terrible things, but when I would say, as long as I survive it, get through it, I really love it. I look back and I appreciate those experiences because I think they change who I am. And obviously I'm not talking about just like encounters with the unexpected, but anything that sort of like changes your perspective or reality on the world. As long as you get through it, as long as I get through it, I'm like totally for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it just makes it makes my existence that much more interesting.
Yeah, I agree, because most people that I've talked to that have had encounters like this, they're not out trying to find it again, and here I am out trying to run off in the woods, chase after these things. So we've been going on for about an hour, so we can probably get ready to wrap this one up, but I was going to ask, is there anything else you would like to discuss beforehand? Because I know with MonsterQuest airing right now, what is on the horizon for you and your company after MonsterQuest?
Well, we're certainly hoping to do more episodes. If History Channel is up for it, we'd love to do more. We had just a blast putting the season together. It was really fun, and if anything I've learned during this season is that there's a lot more stories out there that I would be really excited to tell and give this sort of platform to. And other than that, we're always developing, and I was just say like staying curious. We're playing around with some limited series. I find that whenever I do a show, it becomes a new part of my life. So, I did that treasure show. There's some cool treasure stories out there that we're sort of searching, looking at some more. So it's, anytime I do one show, I feel like it just is like a gateway into some more of that other stuff. Cause I just, I kind of want to tell more stories like it, but so it's following a little bit of the stuff that we've done historically, and then trying to find some new things to dig into as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, it's the greatest part about my job is that it's chaos, and I can never really predict where it's going to take me next. So I'll be excited to find out, but I'll let you know.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, Jared, it has been a pleasure talking to you. I hope nothing but success for you and MonsterQuest and your company and your next endeavor.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Yep. You have a good night.
You too. See ya.
If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can also go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Just make sure to reach out and get a hold of me, and we will get something scheduled for a future episode. You can also find Tinfoil Tales on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for Tinfoil Tales Podcast. You can reach out to me that way too. Remember to share the show around. Word of mouth is the best way to help the show grow. And just remember, truth comes at cost. Are you willing to pay the price?